Hello everybody and welcome, a very warm welcome on this very cold day to the first seminar of our 2022-23 Rylands Lunchtime Seminar Series. I'm Guido Armstrong from the Italian Department and the John Rylands Research Institute at the University of Manchester, and I'll be chairing this session today. So you're joining us live online from our technical suite in the John Rylands Library and Deansgate and from various other rooms in that building and across the campus. As usual, we're going to be showing some objects in the collections and presenting new research on them. And today's seminar is entitled Scribbling in Old Books, What Annotations Can Tell Us About the Lives of Former Owners. And it's going to be presented by Hannah Barker and Jane Gallagher from the John Rylands Research Institute and Library. So before I introduce our speakers, I just want to do a few housekeeping notes as usual. So this event is being recorded and it'll be edited and made available on the John Rylands Library YouTube channel. Auto subtitles are available using your own settings. We're using the Zoom webinar format, so this means that your camera and mic is disabled on entry. But we will have time for questions at the end. We should have about 15 minutes for questions. So if you'd like to ask one, you can add questions to the Q&A function, which is available in Zoom, and I will relay them to the panel on your behalf. You can also use the chat function as well for questions and comments as we go through, and we'll be monitoring both of these during the seminar. So, as I said, we'll have time to take a few questions at the end. We're aiming to finish around 12:45, 12:50 at the latest. And as usual, we'd love your feedback on how it's gone. So we'll be sending out a questionnaire at the end. So without further preamble, I shall now introduce the speakers. Professor Hannah Barker perhaps needs no introduction, but she is going to have one anyway. She's an 18th century historian and professor of British history at the University of Manchester, and she's the director of the John Rylands Research Institute. So it's particularly excellent that she's opening our seminar series this year. Beyond the university, Hannah is chair of Manchester Histories, which is a charity that works with people and communities in Greater Manchester. She's a historical advisor for the National Trust at Quarrybank Mill, and she's chair of the Library Committee of Chetham's Library. Among her many other major grant projects, she's currently running a project on the religious faith of ordinary people in northern towns between 1740 and 1830, and she'll be speaking on that topic today. Presenting with Hannah today is Jane Gallagher. Jane is Head of Digital Special Collections and Services, which is a vastly important role which includes oversight of the expert photography team, Manchester Digital Collections and the services team who maintain the building and support research and visitors. As a curator, she manages the religious printed collections from 1500, apart from the non-conformist collections. But her responsibilities include the internationally renowned Bible collection, which is a core part of the founding collection developed by Henrietta Rylands. And so she's exceptionally well placed to speak to the objects today. So thank you both for opening the series, and over to you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. The work I'm going to talk about today is part of a project called Faith in the Town. If we could have that slide up, please. The Faith in the Town project is not me on my own. I'm joined by colleagues from the University of Manchester and also the University of Nottingham. Here we all are under a lovely picture of Oldham with some factory chimneys, and we've been funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So what I want to talk about today is part of that research that's based largely on the collections at the Rylands. Can I have the next slide, please? As researchers over the last 3 years, we've been running all over the north of England and London, but mostly the north of England. We've been to 50 separate archives and libraries and 24 museums and galleries. The museums and galleries is mostly me, but lots of the heavy work was done by Kate and Caris, who did sterling efforts in the archives, looking for evidence of the religious belief of what we were calling ordinary people, or lay piety as it's known, in the 18th century, and how this affected their lives. Next slide, please. I picked for myself to go to the museums because I was really interested in working on objects, and I got to look at really fun things like this Wesley teapot. Now, the Rylands does actually have a collection of Wesleyana, which is really fun to look at. But this bad boy is from the Walker Art Gallery. They have some fantastic pieces there, a really fantastic ceramics collection. But I found ceramics and samplers and other items like pictures all over Northern repositories. But I want to talk about books today because I'm in the Rylands, of course. Could we have the next slide? So the sorts of objects I was interested in are things that are owned in the home. I was interested in domestic religion, so religion that takes place, or religious practice that takes place in the home. So one of the ways I used to try and measure this was by looking at wills and the bequests that are left in wills. And I sampled women's wills throughout the period 1740 and 1830. I picked women's wills because they tend, not always, but they tend to have more descriptions of individual items and who they're leaving them to, and sometimes even why, which is fantastic. Now, what that survey did was to show that there are lots of different types of objects that people held in different northern towns, but by far the most common religious object that people had in their homes were religious books, and of those, Bibles were number one. So we're going to talk about religious books today, and particularly the marks that people made on religious books. So we've finished with the PowerPoint, but Jane, I have a question for you. Why are there so many religious books in the John Rylands Library?
That's a very good question,
Thank
Hannah.
you.
Thank you. So in common with a lot of the kind of civic 19th century founded institutions in the Northwest, there's a very strong religious connection between the founders and the collections that exist. So Enriqueta Rylands, who created the John Rylands Library effectively in memory of her husband, she has a very interesting history. She was raised in Cuba as a Catholic, but when she came to Manchester, she started attending the Congregational College, Congregational Chapel even, that John Rylands also attended. So both John and Enriqueta were very interested in Bible scholarship, and their non-conformist beliefs made them feel that it was very important for people to be able to study religion and to read the Bible for themselves. So that's sort of where the idea, the germ of the idea came from. And then when Enriqueta was setting up the library, she drew on their existing collections, which were quite small, but John Rylands had focused on biblical scholarship and was interested in funding that. And then as the collections grew, Enriqueta was particularly interested in buying items that had a religious nature, hence the very impressive Bible collection that we have, which does include a copy of the Gutenberg Bible and several early editions of the Tyndale Testament as well. So those are the founding collections, and they're very much reflected in the fabric of the building, where we have various religious figures in the stonework and in the windows. And then as we've continued to develop the collection, there are a number of local non-conformist colleges that have also donated their books. So it's a very strong religious connection that comes from a certain place, which has continued to develop throughout the 20th century.
Now, when I came to you to talk about religious books in the Rylands, I was particularly interested in books with annotations. How could you find me? How could you help me find those books?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say with some difficulty, because unfortunately, when a lot of these books were catalogued, the marks in them and the ownership of ordinary people weren't really considered to be very important. So in some cases, there is a record in the catalogue of somebody having scribbled or written in a book, or some provenance information. In a lot of cases, there isn't. But what we have been doing is when we get a book out, if we notice something in there, then we'll try and add that to the catalogue. We've also had a few volunteer projects that have been focused on going through and writing down any of that provenance, because it is really interesting and important, and there is increasing academic interest in it as well. So it's been a challenge, but in all of the thousands of books that we have, we've managed to find some.
Quite a few, actually. Yes, so thank you. So why I'm interested in people writing in books is it tells me about ownership, and it also tells me about use. So a Bible is something, a family Bible is something that you read aloud to oneself. You might study from it, but some of the things we're going to show you today are nothing to do with obvious religious study, and they're to do with other uses of Bibles as places to make notes and scribble, places to practice your handwriting, to do, I think we've got somewhere where somebody's done a bit of a calculation. And also we're going to see some examples of writing by children in Bibles. Now, I think what this tells us is that Bibles are very, at once sacred and holy books, but also everyday books that all members of the household might have access to. There's a particularly good example I'll show you right at the end of children from one family doing kind of competitive signature practicing in the same book. So Bibles are clearly important. People look after them. They pass them down through the generations. It's literally the word of God in your household. but people also write on the word of God in ways that seem more secular, and that to me is really interesting and really personal. So we're going to look at some examples of that today, and I thought we could start off with looking at this copy of The Saint's Happiness. Mm-hmm. So we're going to look at the visualizer. Thank you. Excellent. Here you go. Okay.
Shall I just say a bit? So the book itself comes from the Northern Baptist College Library. So that's an example of one of the educational institutions whose library we have. And it's been very well used, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it has. So this Bible is obviously owned at one time by members of the Palin family. And we can trace them as a family from Manchester. So I've been doing some rudimentary family history here, but fortunately, I've had your colleague, Julie Ramwell, to help me with some expert family history work. So this is a Manchester family, and they show that this is their Bible. They've got pen markings here, some kind of scribbly pencil markings that you can see here, some even greater scribbling here that just looks like somebody's doodling away with a pencil. Here's a little calculation. And here we'll see a few of these, some important family dates. We can talk about why you might use these sorts of books to write family dates. There are scarcities of paper, and paper's expensive. Books are also expensive, but I think it's also a special place to record your family tree, because you know it's going to be looked after, it's going to survive, but also because it somehow relates you to the family of God by making those markings. So we have a second book to look at. This is a copy of the life of the Reverend John Wesley, including an account of the great revival of religion in Europe and America, in which he was the first and chief instrument. This is from 1792, this book, although obviously a lot of the markings we find will date from later periods. Lovely.
There you go. I'll just zoom out a bit so you can see the whole thing.
So this book's part of the Wesley College of Bristol collection. So one of those non-conformist collections that you said came into the Rylands at various points. It had training colleges, including in Didsbury, I think. So
yes, absolutely.
This probably came up the road from Didsbury at some point into the National Methodist collection. Yeah, brilliant.
So these ones have quite an interesting history because they move around the country, and so they go from various different training libraries and then end up back together. So yeah, there's quite an interesting traveling history to them.
But at one point before it's in one of these libraries, it's obviously owned by a particular family. And this family is the Bakes family. And the writing we find here on the flyleaf suggests that the original owner is Elizabeth Bakes, and you can see here Elizabeth Bakes' book, given to her by my father. This is given to her sometime after the publication, 1792. At that point, she appears to have lived in or near Bingley, but from the time of her daughter's birth in 1801, she lives in Bradford with her husband, Joshua Bakes. And Elizabeth in turn passes this book to her daughter. And there's a note here, which is much harder to read here. Martha Bakes' book, given her by her mother, January the 20th, 1815. Now, when she inherited this book, Martha was about 14 years old. And one of the handwritten notes she made within the covers here records that, I think it's here. Yes, this book given by her mother on her death. It's quite hard to read that hand. But she dies 5:30 on Saturday morning and dies very happy. Now, within this book, there's lots of marks of serious study where people have underlined things or asterisked them to show that they're taking their religious study seriously. Lots of things marked in pencil. But what interested me about this book was just here, somebody's copied the pen and writing here in pencil. Now that's that's quite difficult to read. And so this is where I took advantage of working in the Rylands and being able to call on our fantastic imaging team, who took various multispectral images of that writing to try and help me read it. Maybe we could have a look at those now on the PowerPoint. Here we go. So if we go back, yeah. So there's probably the most useful picture actually of the graphite markings, but I also where you can also see that corrections have been made, but I also asked them to go through using different colors, or rather they suggested they suggested it and I said yes please. So if we go through the slides, we can see in different colors, which was helpful to me to try and read what was very faded graphite marking. If we just go through the next one and the final one. Okay, and now we could go back to the visualizer, thank you. What these revealed to me actually is that this graphite marking was just a copy of the pen rack and behind it, above it. But that was interesting to me because the graphite, the pencil, is written in what looks like a child's hand. So this is an example of somebody practicing their writing in an important family book, an important religious book, but also somewhere to practice your writing. And this reminds me, I think, of what the historian Natalie Seaman Davis has said about books, that they're the carriers of relationships. And here we see that marking relationships between different family members. Okay, we've got another book to show you. We'll look at the Schofield book.
Okay.
So the importance of these sorts of religious books in family homes is not just the presence of God's word within the household or somewhere to practice your writing or scribble, but also, as we've already seen, to record important family dates, especially births, marriages and deaths. We see this in this book here, which is a copy of Lawrence Howe's A Complete History of the Holy Bible, published in 1741. About 15 years old after its publication, perhaps bought secondhand, it moves into the ownership of the Schofield family of Oldham. And here we see Joseph Schofield, his book. And then later on, we've got another list of dates. Joseph Schofield, his book again. Joseph Schofield was born in 1772 and Joseph Schofield was born in 1791. That would be his son. That annoying habit of people in the 18th century to name their children after themselves. So you never know which one, but you do here because of dates. Now, this is quite a sparse list of dates, but we have a fantastic record that we're going to show you next of the Cousins family of Sheffield. So this is our last book that we want to show you.
And it might just take a moment because it's very large and very heavy.
That's okay. So Bibles are a really common place for people to record family dates. But they weren't the only place. We've already seen other kinds of religious books with family dates in. And we're going to show you a copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs, as it's called. John Fox's books, Acts and Monuments, popularly known as Fox's Book of Martyrs. Now, this particular book, was published in 1593, and much later than my period, sometime probably in the 19th century. It's given an extremely fancy cover by its owners. It's not surprising, since this was owned by a silversmith family in the 18th century. So it's published in 1593. At some point, it comes into the hands of the Cousins family of Sheffield, a family of Sheffield cutlers who are also Quakers. And there's a fantastic listing in here of births, marriages and deaths. between the period 1744 and 1782. We'll just locate that for you. They didn't put it at the front. They found a spare sheet here of paper in between the first and second volumes of this edition of the Bible. And here you see the birth of their first child, Elizabeth Cousins, daughter of Isaac and Mary Cousins, was born in the 13th of the 11th month, 1744. And thereafter, they follow the birth of other children. Another Elizabeth here, born the next year, which suggests that the first Elizabeth has died, another 18th century practice. Then an Isaac Cousins, John Cousins, Nathaniel Cousins. And sadly, as you read through this list, you find a number of deaths of these children at the same time. These notes look to be contemporaneous in the sense that they're written at the time of these births. And you get that sense when you see the whole page, because they start off in a kind of large, confident hand. And by the time they're writing in the last births at the bottom, and then the death along the side of the mother, Mary, it's in a really tight, small, cramped hand because they've run out of space on this page. At other places in the Cousins edition of the Acts and Monuments, we see different marks. So we just want to have a look at one of these. Now, this is obviously, it's a large book, as you've seen, grander than the other books. It's obviously a precious family item. Somebody gets it bound later on. They look after it carefully. But it is also a book, I think, that other people can use. So in this book, there are signs of serious study. There are various manicures, that kind of drawing of a pointing finger, various asterisks, various notations and underlinings. But this is a lovely page here where we can see just squiggles on the page. And on this, if we zoom in on this picture here, this illustration, these doodles all around, I think, are probably the result of childish hands practicing with a pen. So we see some of the Cousins' children who managed to survive into childhood probably getting hold of this Bible and having a good old scribble on it. So what this tells me about domestic religion is the importance of religious books to the family and other religious objects that we look at, but also their accessibility and their use for other reasons. I want to show you some images from of a few other things that we don't have with us here, but just before we stop talking, on the PowerPoint. Thanks. I'm afraid they're from other libraries, and I know, Jane, I know.
We don't have all religious collections, it's okay.
I know, I just want to apologise to you. So this is actually another one in John Rylands, but I just wanted to show it to you quickly because it's fantastic for the level of detail that the Morley family of Doncaster go into here. And in fact, part of the reason why these births, marriages and deaths go over 2 pages is because the owner, Edward Morley, gets married to a second wife, and it's mostly the second family that's along the other side. It's a lovely book, you can, and a beautiful image by the imaging team. Thank you. And all these books survive because people look after them. They're handed down through the family line usually, and then given to local museums or libraries because people see them as precious. So they're precious, I guess, not just to people in the 18th century, but to people in the 19th and 20th centuries. I just love this Bible. This is a Bible from 1736. It's in the Cliff Castle Museum in Bradford, part of Bradford Museums. A very lovely team there helped dig this out for me. Andrew Irving is somebody who's actually born in Scotland and ends up moving south to Wakefield. And you can actually see in this image, partway through that handwriting on the right-hand side image, that recording the marriage in Wakefield in 1794. The next image, please. This is fantastic. This is why I wanted to show this. So this is the Sheffield Archives copy of, sorry, no, it's in York Libraries and Archives, but it's that the Barnsley family is a Sheffield family. And I love this. This is where I didn't have enough space to show all these, but members of the Barnsley family, including the girls, write their names all over the pages, as if they're competing with each other to show ownership of this. And there's this fantastic little slide of, it's some kind of cod Latin, I think, but here they are, some dogs and a man. I think they're dogs, they could be sheep, who knows what they are, but fantastic doodling there at the bottom. And I've saved the last one, then we'll stop talking, let people ask questions. This is my favourite. This is in Leeds Discovery Centre. It's a very small book. You can see the dimensions there at the bottom. A book you could put in your pocket. And it was owned by John Hurst of Dewsbury, and it's an abridgment of the Bible or a near way to Christian knowledge for the use of children. So it's a children's abbreviated edition of the Bible. And here, under the book of Jonah, at the end of the book of Jonah, he's drawn a little ship in pen. Such a beautiful little image that I wanted to end on. But again, here is a child. In other examples we've shown, I've suggested that children are kind of naughtily scribbling. Here is a child engaging with a biblical text through the medium of drawing on the page. Lovely thing. Anyway, do ask some questions if you have any.
Thank you both for that fabulous presentation. I mean, I've got loads of questions to ask, and I can see we've got a couple coming up already. But I just wanted to say it was a really incredible insight into kind of past lives and past worlds. While we wait for some more questions to come in, perhaps I might indulge myself and ask mine first. Is that okay?
Go on. Go
I'm in
ahead.
charge.
And sorry about the PowerPoints coming up wrongly, people. Apologies.
The excellent team corrected it.
Good.
So I wondered, is there any kind of, did you notice any kind of localized features in the books? So either sort of like people in one town were particularly interested in one text, or you know, like people are interested in the Meditations on the Life of Christ in Carlisle, but in Huddersfield they like something else? Or is there anything in the books themselves that people do? Or is it
not so localized? I mean, people sometimes write where they live. You know, I am Hannah Barker of Manchester. You know, they want to say, rather than other places, but these and not so much, not that kind of local knowledge, and their engagement tends to be with the text more. But I guess I've tried to situate them in local areas by looking at using a kind of family history methods to identify the owners, and that's been great. Well, it's great unless you find a Bible that's absolutely fantastic, full of great detail, and then you find out, I work on northern towns, you see, and then you find out they're from Somerset or something. It's all a bit disappointing. But no, afraid not.
Okay, oh well, I wanted to ask anyway. So the first question that we've got up there is, you know, were the books affordable for people in the 18th century, and would people in the 18th century be able to read and write as well as we do today? So have you got any?
Yeah. Thanks, Kinjara. That's a good question. Books are expensive. They definitely are. So most people wouldn't have been able to afford books, but there's a vibrant market in secondhand books in this period. We know that books also get gifted, but one place I found a lot of books, apart from in the wills, was also in a surviving pawnbroker's account book from York. So these are people pretty low down on the social scale, some of them, labourers, people working in markets rather than shops, who are pawning things like handkerchiefs alongside a family Bible. So the fact that you find Bibles and prayer books most commonly being pawned in this period by people. I mean, rich people pawn things occasionally, but by people of clearly modest means suggests, I think, that we can't say that everybody owned religious books, definitely not, but people quite far down the social scale do. Can people read and write? Yes, again, there's a lot of work on this, not done by me, but on literacy in this period that again suggests that people quite far down the social scale certainly can read. Reading's more important than writing in this period, but that they can read. But anybody, I don't know, anybody that worked in trade, for example, needed to be able to at least have basic literacy and numeracy in order to work. It's also the case that visitors to Britain in the 18th century used to comment very commonly on how well people could read, especially newspapers, which they often thought was quite dangerous. But thank you for those questions.
We're getting quite a few through now, so I'll just take another one. I mean, we've got one from an anonymous contributor who says that they grew up in Nigeria and Bibles were sacred, so you couldn't underline or annotate. This is wild to them. So how does that work with these being holy books?
Well, for a start, it shows the difference in cultural context, doesn't it, to 20th century Nigeria and 18th century northern towns. I'm not saying that children that scribble over Bibles don't get in trouble. I bet they do. But I think it shows that they're not kept under lock and key and in places where children can't get hold of them. I also think it depends how you're interacting with the Bible, because for many people in England in the 18th and 19th centuries, annotating Bibles for study was not sacrilegious at all. That was engaging with the Word of God. That's what one should do. Bible reading and Bible study and taking lessons from the Bible was something that you should be doing. So just a very different attitude towards sacred books. You can write on them and they're still sacred.
Thank you. Somebody else has said, has questioned whether, would the Bible perhaps have been the only paper in the house? Would it have been the only book? Is this a place where they would do pen trials? If they had pencils, would they have paper?
Yeah, I think that's quite likely. That this is the only piece of paper you can find, or that's readily to hand, or that you have at all. Paper is expensive, and maybe if you had to take an important note, you would put it in the only paper to hand. I'm sure the reason why you record births, marriages and deaths is not only because there's not a lot of paper, but the specifically precious nature of these books, which means that those records are going to get preserved.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredible that this sort of the sense of the importance of the book means that it becomes the family's reservoir of information, really. So many good questions. Somebody has asked, they've noticed that you've concentrated on writing, but have you found any other things in these books? Is there evidence they've been used to press flowers or keep souvenirs? Have you found anything interesting tucked into the books, or have the curators taken those out by now? No,
I have found the odd pressed flower when I'm going through, but not in any of the Bibles that I write about. I found some disgusting things. I opened a box once in the Rylands to find a diary that was covered in badly molded, although I'm sure stabilized. You know the one I mean, don't you? The Bambi diary, Bible, which was covered in deer hide, but deer hide that had been moth-eaten for many years before you got rid of it. So, or another Bible that I've read that's been half chewed by rats. That was actually particularly disgusting to handle, even though I knew obviously it was all clean. Sorry, I'm veering away. What was the question that they were actually asking?
Well, they were asking what have you found in books? So I think
mostly just writing and drawing. I found. I know, but I know people find other things. Flowers is something, but people hide things in books too. I personally haven't haven't found that myself when I've been looking at these items.
It might be worth saying as well, so if we do find anything in a book when it comes into us, we would either keep the items, stabilize it, maybe put it into Melanex and keep it in the page, or make a note to make sure that those can go back with the book, because it's an important part of the material history of the book as well.
So my brief kind of limited it, because I look at the north of England and I look at northern towns specifically. It means it limits the number of things that I'm looking at. I mean, I still found quite a lot, but I didn't find anything really exciting, which is why I told you an anecdote about disgusting things instead.
Fred has put a question. I don't know if you can see it up there as well, but Fred said that, you know, his PhD student is working on kind of early modern books in the 16th and 17th century and is finding quite similar patterns of use and interaction. So to what extent do you think these annotations, ownerships and reading patterns of the 18th century are different from the earlier period then? Or is there continuity?
I'm sure, Fred, that it's not that different. I know that, oh gosh, I can't believe I can't remember his name at the moment. What's the head of the Warburg called? Bill Sherman. Bill Sherman has written extensively on annotations in books from an earlier period, and he finds quite similar things. Alex Walsham, I know because I heard her gave a really interesting paper on early modern religious books and writing in them. I don't think that's published yet, but so Fred, I don't think it's that different. So I guess the focus of our project is more broadly is about showing how religious belief doesn't fade out with industrialization and urbanization. So we're not saying this stuff is new. What we're saying is it doesn't go away so much. So there's a lot that's quite similar.
Thank you. I would say we've got probably about 5 or 7 more minutes for questions, so you can put some more in the chat if you want. Somebody has asked where do the scribbles usually tend to be? So are there particularly kind of marked places in the book, or, you know, we've seen the kind of family dates page.
Well, the births, marriages and deaths tend to be wherever there's a clear sheet of paper, which is often at the beginning or the end, but sometimes, as we saw with this, in the middle. The scribbles are anywhere. Really, it's not like they've taken against the Book of John or something. They're anywhere. The annotations tend to be much more organized, and that's what suggests study. That's a different kind of, and sometimes there are examples of annotations that are quite personal. I know I've looked at another religious book, I cannot remember which it is, but something that Susanna pointed out to me, where somebody had made a comment about their family grave in the part of the Bible that talked about death and memory. So sometimes it's the content is very meaningful. And we saw with the scribble of the child in Dewsbury. Well, it's not a scribble, is it? It's a drawing, that he was completely driven, I think, by the content too. So sometimes the doodle is anywhere, it seems random, and sometimes it's definitely engaging with the text.
Thank you. I mean, this leads into the next question from Frank, who is a former luminary of the Italian department, I should say. And he said, as well as births, deaths, locations, etc., do any of the juicy tidbits of personal details or life events come down to us? Or perhaps through your research as you kind of look at them in the family histories?
Yeah, I have to say it's apart from being a bit irreverent at times, as we've seen with scribbling on the Bible, for example, per se, I haven't found any juicy tidbits as I would understand them from these sources. There are many, I would say, from my own research, in diaries and correspondence and court cases, as you would expect. So I could talk at length and bore for Britain on juicy tidbits of northern people's lives in the 18th century, but not from the evidence of material culture.
We will have you back for that one, Hannah. So Ian's put a question in here, and I think you kind of partly answered this already, but he says, is there much evidence of critical dialogue annotations with the content of these religious texts? So as you've said, there's a kind of program.
Yeah, definitely, Ian. And thank you for asking the sensible scholarly question. Yes, Ian, there is. And that's why I discovered quite early on that it's worth going through page by page to look for notation. It often doesn't change much in its character. People focus on particular bits of the Bible or another religious book more than others, but those are definitely marks of serious engagement. And even I would argue that that ship I showed you right at the end is a mark of well, not a critical dialogue, but a serious engagement with the text.
I wonder if that also shows like a little boy who's more interested in the transport than the whale. You know, because I would have thought they might have drawn the whale, but he's really into the boat. So
the boat is more beautiful, surely, and easier to draw.
Well, maybe I would have thought the whale was easy to draw. We've got a great kind of closing question from Megan, actually, who says, what are the next steps for this research project? Do you intend to curate an exhibition of scribbles in margins and on flyleaves?
Thanks, Megan. We did have a little exhibition actually in the Rylands of some of these books, which I'm afraid you've missed, but worry not, because I will soon, but I'm not going to give a particular date here, we'll be finishing our book. We're writing a book on the whole project, which will be published, and I hope we'll be making that open access, so anybody will be able to read it for free. But that you'll have to hold your breath slightly for that. But there are some tasters of the sort of material that you'll find from the wider project on our project website, the Faith in the Town website, which I think we can put into the chat. Yeah, so you can see that. And I guess I was going to say in a year, but maybe in a bit longer. Fortunately, next year I'm on academic leave to finish the book, Megan, so I can't believe you're harassing me about it now, but yes, I'll be doing that next year.
And I will also direct your attention to our fantastic kind of digital infrastructure, which would be a suitable place for a future exhibition as well, or anything, just to get the plug in there. So I think we've just brought it in pretty much perfectly to time, unless we've got any more burning questions. No, I think I can wrap up here. So I think we should give you all a virtual round of applause. Or an actual one if you're in the room. It's a really fantastic presentation and a great way to open the series. And I'd like to thank the audience for such, excellent and engaged questions as well. So this is our first seminar, as I said, and we're going to have a break now for a few weeks, and we'll pick up again at the start of the next teaching term in February for the rest of the seminar series, which will run through to the end of March. So I would say please look out for the announcements on the socials when we put those up. And thank you all for coming, and I hope I'll see many of you again in the new year. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for coming.